Hi, this is Paul Mallory from the Thrive Tribe. Welcome to today's book review. Today's book is one that I've known for a few years now and have lived by, really. It's one that I reference more than any other book, probably, in daily conversation, in the way I live my life. And it's a great piece of research, which I'm going to share with you in the hope that you, like all of these book reviews, that you find these findings helpful too. Today's book is Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, Ph.D., who's Professor of Psychology at Arizona State University in the USA. The book dates back to 1984. It's been updated several times since, recent editions. And it's a study of compliance. What causes one person to say yes to another person? How do people get other people to comply with what it is they want? That's what Cialdini researched. Why does this matter so much now? I believe it matters more than ever, actually. First of all, you are being influenced every day of your life, and you don't necessarily know it. Most of these influences happen unconsciously, and our brains automatically cause us to make choices and decisions we're not aware of. If the influence on our decision making is unconscious, we can't choose. We don't have any conscious choice. We're acting automatically. If we can't choose, if we can't decide, then we are acting the way someone else wants us to act. And in that situation, it's unlikely we will find a life of individual meaning if we're just doing what everybody else wants us to do all the time. When we talk about being influenced, we're talking about many different sectors and realms, from sales to culture to conspiracy theorists who want you to believe everything they come up with, to health, you name it, public sector and so on. So you are, whether you know it or not, you are being influenced every day of your life. Second reason why it matters so much now, governments understandably are requiring compliance from people right now during the pandemic. I think many governments and people in power will have been very surprised by the extent to which people comply when they're told to do something. People in power might be tempted to find out what else people are willing to comply with if they push the envelope a bit and if they stretch the boundaries of the health crisis a bit. So I think we have to be really wary of allowing our freedoms to be restricted and removed in a good cause when they don't necessarily need to be. I'm a great believer in freedom in life to the extent that it doesn't hurt anybody else. So we need to consciously choose whether we're complying with some of these things or not. And obviously there are many things that we should comply with ethically, morally, and to protect ourselves on health grounds. But other things not so much so. The third reason why I think it matters so much right now is that the pervasive influence of social media is growing very rapidly. And it struck me yesterday when I was thinking about this that for particular identity groups, we're all in one. We see ourselves as part of a particular group that looks and feels a bit like us. So we see ourselves as being part of that group. It's almost like we're growing a global consciousness for each of these identity groups so that everybody in that group now thinks the same, says the same things, uses the same language. And because it's shared so quickly across social media, how much thinking are we actually doing for ourselves, and how often are we choosing differently to the group? And how often are we just doing what the group says or what we think the group would do? So I'll share the research into that with you, and it's quite interesting the extent to which we just go along. Beware of losing your personal ability to choose differently to the group. So this book, I believe, is really important right now. Cialdini has researched and reported back on what influences humans. And if we know what those things are, we can consciously watch for them and notice them when they're happening, and that should enable us to make individual choices rather than just going along. Cialdini identified 6 what he calls weapons of influence. These are the things that compliance professionals, as he calls them, use. They use these 6 weapons. Their business and livelihood is to make us comply and do what they want us to do, whether that's private sector or government. And we're aware of influencers on social media, for example, whose job it is to get us to buy things. Cialdini spent 3 years experimenting and immersing himself in the world of compliance professionals, salespeople, fundraisers, recruiters, advertisers. Quite often he did it by going undercover, joining organisations, being trained as a salesperson to find out what the tricks and techniques were, and then reporting back what he found, which is quite an eye-opener. So let me just tell you what the 6 categories of weapons of influence are, and then we'll go through them one at a time. First one is reciprocation. Then the second one is commitment and consistency. Social proof, number 3. Number 4, liking. Number 5, authority. And number 6, scarcity. Those are the 6 things we're going to go through. Those weapons have the ability to produce automatic, mindless compliance. In other words, we say yes without thinking first. We just, on autopilot, respond in the way we're required to respond. Because our brains have automatic behaviour patterns to cope with the vast amounts of data and information coming at us these days, our brains just decide without us even thinking about it. That makes us vulnerable to compliance professionals because they understand these brain patterns, and so they can find ways to appeal to those patterns in a way that will make us say yes to the things they want us to say yes to, whether it be buying a product or complying with a rule or whatever it might be. Really simple example of one of those brain patterns. Typically, generally speaking, our brains consider that a product which is very expensive is probably high quality. A product which is very cheap is probably low quality. Now, of course, often that's true, but our brain is automatically making that assumption. It's a kind of shortcut to save us spending processing time thinking about it. So if you're a compliance professional, if you're working in sales and you want to use that principle, that brain pattern, that automatic pattern to get us to spend a certain amount of money, what you can do is you can artificially inflate the price of a product, show us that price, and then you can show us a big discount so that we believe this product is both a quality product because it was very expensive and we're getting a great price because of this huge discount. The fact they inflated the price so that they could then reduce it doesn't register in our decision making, which is automatic and very fast. So a simple example of how it's used. Let's review the 6 weapons so that you can spot them when they're being used against you. First weapon, reciprocation. And what that's about is doing a favour creates an obligation. It creates an obligation in us. If somebody does us a favour, we feel obliged to do them a favour back. In fact, in English, in England and in the US, we quite often say things like, I'm much obliged, meaning thank you. But that language, I'm much obliged, says it all. An obligation has been created. We feel an obligation to do someone a favour back if they do one for us. There was a professor that Cialdini talks about who sent out Christmas cards to a bunch of strangers and got a very high percentage return from those strangers of a Christmas card coming back. They felt a strong obligation to return the favour, even though they didn't know who this guy was. Very odd behaviour. But there we are, a powerful influence. So that kind of influence, the reciprocation, it possesses the power to elicit an automatic yes. So people who want to get a yes from you will give you a small favour. They'll do you a small favour first to make you more likely to say yes to their request. The example Cialdini gives in the book, the Hare Krishna religion certainly used to be seen quite often in airports where they would hang about and give the gift of a flower to a passing stranger, pin it on their jacket, and then ask, would you like to make a donation, a charitable donation to the religion? Why? Because if you're given a flower, you feel like you're kind of obliged to do some kind of favour back. And statistically, you're much more likely to donate if you've been given a flower. Even though you consider the flower to be worthless, and it's only a little thing, and you throw it away as soon as you get out of sight of the guy who gave it to you. Even in that case, you still feel that obligation. Now that's a small, worthless gift. Imagine how much more powerful it is when we consider it to be something of high value, or something of bigger value. Some examples. Do politicians, do you think, ever do favours for one another? And if they do, why? Do they do it because they're lovely people and they want to spread happiness in the world? Maybe, some of them. Could it be that some of them hope to collect in terms of an obligation repaid later? Is that possible? Do companies provide donations to politicians? Do they donate to political parties and donate to presidential campaigns and that kind of thing? Why do they do that? Is it because they're lovely people and they want to spread the love? Or is it because they expect some favourable treatment at some point, or a favourable decision at some point in the future? Could be. Do charities ever send the free gift of a pen, a plastic pen, completely worthless, usually about half normal size? Do they ever do that, or send a free calendar or some other free gift? Yes, they do. Why? Because you're much more likely to say yes to their request for a donation. Now, does all this mean we should never do or accept a favour? No, of course not. In fact, in my opinion, the definition of love is unconditionally doing something for someone with no expectation of reward or return. That is love. So, no, I'm not saying we should never do favours. There's a wonderful principle as well called random acts of kindness, which I love, which is just go and do a kindness for a stranger just because you can and because it makes you feel good. Keep doing that. Don't, for goodness sake, stop. What we should do, though, is just discern and differentiate between acts of love and acts designed to create an obligation. So we should question the motive a little bit. The favour isn't always a gift. It can be a concession. One of the experiments in Cialdini's book, he got people out on the street talking to strangers and asked, would you buy, to support our charity, would you please buy a ticket for a dance on Saturday night at £5? And the guy might reply, no, I don't really want to go to a dance, it's particularly a charitable dance, and I don't want to spend £5. And the follow-up from the volunteer was, well, maybe you'd buy one of these bars of chocolate for £1 then. And guess what? Those people who've been asked to buy the ticket first were much more likely to buy the £1 bar of chocolate afterwards, because it felt like they'd been given a concession or a favour by not having to buy the ticket to the dance. See how it works? It suddenly makes the chocolate bar seem quite a reasonable option, doesn't it, when you've avoided having to spend £5 on going to a dance. Okay, so that's the way it works. Sometimes it's a concession rather than a gift. So that's reciprocation. Favour creates an obligation. Number 2 in the weapons of influence, weapon number 2, commitment and consistency. Once we choose or make a decision or take a stand, we put pressure on ourselves to behave consistently with it. Cialdini found that people placing bets on horses at a horse racing stadium were much more confident in their bets once they'd placed the bet at the betting window than they had been before they placed the bet. The odds of the horse winning hadn't changed at all before the bet was placed and after the bet was placed, but the person felt a lot more committed to the horse and they really wanted to be proved right. So they became convinced the horse was more likely to win because they'd bet on it. Statistically proven. Another example, he set up an experiment on a beach at the seaside where he would put his towel down on the beach next to someone with his transistor radio, his music playing radio on the towel, and would then, he employed somebody to come along and pretend to be a thief while Cialdini went down to the sea for a swim. The thief would come along, steal the radio and run away. And he found that the stranger sitting next to his towel, 4 out of 20 people would intervene and do something about it, maybe chase the thief. 4 out of 20. He then repeated the experiment, modified it slightly. He asked the stranger on the towel next to his, would you mind keeping an eye on my things? Would you please watch my things while I go for a swim? And they said, yes, of course, I'll keep an eye on your things. When the pretend thief then came along and stole the radio and ran off, 19 out of 20 people intervened and chased them because they had made the commitment that they would look after the stuff. So they felt obliged, an internal obligation to act consistently with the commitment they made. It's a very powerful principle. Because we don't want to be seen as indecisive people, confused, two-faced, unreliable people. We want to be seen as consistent people who do what they say, who act as they promised. To the point where sometimes being consistent is valued more highly than being right. Politicians, for example, famously don't like to do U-turns, they don't like to change their minds, they don't like to be seen as indecisive people who can't make up their minds about things. So they will stick to what they said before and refuse to acknowledge that they may have changed their minds or changed direction. They are desperate to be seen to be consistent and don't want to be attacked for having made a new decision about something. My favourite Gandhi story is one where he was on stage and was accused by someone in the audience of saying something different to what he said last week. And he said, yes, that's right. I've found out more about that subject and I now realise I was wrong what I said last week, and this is now the truth as I see it. And he said, I'll never put the truth second to being right. I'll never put being right ahead of the truth. Because what mattered to him was truth in life, trying to get to the truth, rather than being right, proving yourself right. That's a massive principle, actually. We could expand that into a whole video, a whole workshop, because lots of what we carry around with us as truths are actually beliefs and perceptions. And if we defend those to the hilt and refuse to ever change our minds, we're just defending positions lots of the time, quite often when they're wrong positions and we're wrong about things. So the ability actually to admit a mistake, the ability to change your mind in light of new information is a strength and a skill and a power that we should nurture. The danger with this consistency commitment weapon is that we are automatically consistent even where it's not the most sensible thing for us. So we'll continue to value what we value and defend what we defend. We'll continue to take the stand we always took. But isn't the world changing very fast? Isn't new information flooding in at an incredible rate? Does it make sense to stick with the positions we've always held, even in the light of new information? And in the current health crisis, for example, you know, we're under a lot of pressure to act in a certain way. That's often, because governments understand how these influence principles work, that's often framed as, if you value doctors and nurses, you will behave in the following way. Isn't it possible to value doctors and nurses but think that the way they want you to behave is the wrong way, without any reduction of your respect and your valuing of the health professionals? Of course it is. Everything isn't binary. Everything isn't black and white. There are shades of grey, and politicians are as capable as the rest of us of making mistakes and getting things wrong and reading the data wrong. As are scientists. Scientists are capable of misinterpretation. They're capable of blind spots. They're capable of cognitive biases, of not taking into account the other evidence over there that doesn't quite fit their narrative. We're all human. All of these things are possible. So what we have to do is try to think consciously about some of these big issues and about the decisions and choices we make, rather than being influenced to just do as we're told all the time, in whatever sector of life this is happening. If someone extracts a promise from you, a commitment from you, you'll feel a great pressure to honour it. So if you make a promise to your children to buy them a certain toy for Christmas, you will feel under great pressure to find that toy. Advertisers know this, so they will help you to make promises before Christmas by advertising toys at moments when the kids are likely to see them, so that they will ask for them, and they will even go as far as not stocking enough in the shops, so that when you go to get one, they're very scarce. We'll talk about scarcity later, it's another one of the principles, and so on. I mean, they understand how these principles work and how to influence us into feeling strong obligations to behave the way they want us to. Another example, if somebody comes around and does a door-to-door survey, and this is an experiment that Cialdini did, and in that survey they were to ask you the question, supposing you were to be asked to spend 3 hours going door-to-door collecting for charity, what would you say to that request to spend 3 hours of your spare time collecting for charity? Quite often people who want to be seen to be reasonable, nice people will say, yeah, it doesn't sound unreasonable. I probably would say yes to that request. of course, what they then did in the experiment was they followed up and they asked people to volunteer to do that. And the rate at which people agreed to spend 3 hours collecting door to door increased by 700% when they'd been visited by the survey person first. So they'd already made the commitment that a nice, reasonable person would do that kind of thing. Then when they were asked to actually do it, they were 700% more likely to say yes than if they were just cold called with the request, will you help us by collecting for charity? So, you know, when organisations understand how this works, they will use these tricks to get us to say yes. Be very careful about agreeing to apparently trivial requests, because they can be setting you up in a consistency trap. So if somebody gets you to sign a petition or asks you to agree to a survey question or asks you to display a sticker in your house, these can often be things that are designed to get you to change your view of yourself. I'm the kind of person who believes in that. I'm the kind of person who does that kind of stuff, and may well be followed up by a request to do something a bit more onerous. So often those trivial requests are setting you up for something. We have to be conscious of these things. An experiment they did, if the salesperson who's trying to sell you something, if they get you to fill out the sales agreement yourself, you're much more unlikely to cancel the agreement later when you have a cooling off period where you have the right to cancel. If you filled in the form, you are much more unlikely to cancel. You're much more likely to honour the commitment. You feel more committed than if the salesman fills out the form. It's a little sales trick. And one I've used a bit in the past myself personally, many years ago, if you make a public declaration to people you care about, you're very likely to stick with it. And a positive use of this, for example, is if you want to stop smoking or some other habit. If you make a public declaration to people whose opinion you value, you're very likely to stick with it and feel a strong obligation to commit and be consistent, especially if you write it down. If you make it a written commitment to them, you're much more likely still to stick with that commitment. Things like bribing people, threatening people, particularly you will have found this with children, those of you who are parents, they achieve temporary compliance but little commitment. You're much more likely to get commitment if people make an inner decision, if they have an inner responsibility to do something. That's much more effective than coercing them, bribing them, threatening them. Because once someone decides to do something, once they decide that they want to do something or not do something, there's more consistency, there's more commitment behind it. And we're allowing them to take personal responsibility for their behaviour. So this particularly will work with children rather than bribing and threatening. So we have to try to avoid being automatically and unthinkingly consistent, because it can be exploited with sales tricks. How do we know when it's happening to us? Quite often when it's happening to us, when we're being exploited, we feel it physically. We have a feeling in the pit of our stomach, this doesn't feel right. I feel like I'm being coerced. I feel like undue pressure is being put on me. And when we feel that, we should do something about it. We should call it, or we should walk away, or we should question what's going on, or ask difficult questions of the person who's putting the pressure on you. So that's consistency and commitment. That's weapon number 2. Weapon number 3, influencing weapon number 3, is social proof. Why, oh why, when you watch a comedy show on TV, do they use those awful canned laughter tracks where, you know, they're using a recording of laughter, which doesn't sound natural, it doesn't sound spontaneous, it doesn't sound like a live audience, it's a laughter track. Why do they do that? Statistically, absolutely research proven, we find the show funnier and we laugh for longer when they have those canned laughter tracks. We don't know that we're doing that, and we don't know that that canned laughter is having that effect on us, but it is. One way we find out what is correct when we're looking around and trying to decide what's true in life and what's not true, it's so difficult to judge these days. One way we find out what is correct is to find out what other people think is correct, and that is social proof. especially in terms of what correct behaviour is. What should I do? The answer to that, quite often we answer it by looking around to see what is everyone else doing. Loads of examples of that at the moment. Is this a situation where I should be wearing a mask because of the pandemic? Is a classic. How do we know whether to wear a mask? First thing we do is look around and say to ourselves, what is everybody else doing? If everybody else seems to be wearing one, we feel pressure to do the same. This is social proof. Have you ever been at a concert, a symphony concert or something like that, and one of the movements of the concert ends and you're not quite sure whether that's the end of a movement or whether it's the end of the whole symphony? You're not sure whether to clap or not. How do you know whether to clap or not? Answer, you just wait to see whether everybody else is clapping. If they are, it's safe to clap. If they're not, it's not the right thing to do. But can you see how that's a massive influence on us? The correct behaviour is do what everybody else does. That can have some really unintended consequences. So we wait, we look around, we look for social proof by seeing what everybody else is doing. Very quick anecdote from me. Years ago, I participated in the London Marathon, travelled down to London. I was waiting for an underground train on the underground platform to take me to Greenwich, which was the start line for the marathon. I was wearing, as were all the other marathon people, there are millions of them, I was wearing my running gear with a number pinned to my chest. So it was very obvious who was a London Marathon runner because they're all dressed up with these numbers on. And there were many hundreds of marathon runners on the platform. When the train to Greenwich arrived, I stepped onto it, turned around to face out towards the platform, and none of the other marathon runners got onto the train. I was with my girlfriend at the time. I looked at her and I said, "Are we on the wrong train?" And it was very, very tempting to get off the train and do whatever those other runners were doing. It was the correct train. We were on the right train. We got to the race on time. Why all those other people didn't get on the train, I have no idea. But I have to tell you, I had a strong internal pressure to get off the train, even though that would have been a mistake. Social proof, very, very powerful. Social evidence of, am I doing the right thing or am I doing the wrong thing? That's how we behave. It works in situations of uncertainty. When people are uncertain, they're much more likely to use others' actions to decide how they should act. And the other big factor is similarity. This is most powerful when we are observing the behaviour of people who are very like us, who are very similar to us. The more similar the people are, the stronger the feeling that we should be doing what they're doing. So you can imagine with the marathon runners, that absolutely 100% those other people are marathon runners because they're all wearing the marathon kit. So those were people like me not doing what I was doing. Very, very powerful pressure. We think what they do tells us the correct behaviour for us. So in advertising, you will see nowadays loads of advertisements which feature people like us. Quite often I think to myself, those are people not like me at all, but I can see what you're trying to do. You're trying to portray them as regular, everyday people just like me who are acting in this particular way, so I should be doing that too. Once you understand this principle, it becomes quite transparent. You can see it quite readily. But advertisers are using it because it works. It causes people to say, that's what I should be doing, because people like me are doing that. So that's why they use real people rather than actors in many of these advertisements. We imitate the behaviour of people like us, and governments, for example, know this. So if they can convince you that people like you think and do this, you're much more likely to do what they want. So watch out for your automatic decisions and behaviour based on what the crowd is doing. It takes away your independent free choice. Doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do necessarily, but do it consciously. Choose to do it consciously rather than just being influenced to do as you're told. This is all about your life, your meaning, your experience. And the Thrive Tribe is all about thriving in life and finding meaning for you as an individual. And you won't get that by following the crowd. You'll need to make some individual decisions. Beware of phony social evidence. There's plenty of that around. People are using it to exploit you. And rigged social proof, particularly in advertising. Average people like you and me behave this way. We've got to be a little bit wary, haven't we, with things like online testimonials, feedback scores, comments, people saying how wonderful something is. How do we know they're genuine? How do we know that the negative reviews are being given as much prominence as the positive reviews? Because we want to see both sides, don't we? We want to see the people who didn't like it as well as the people who did like it. And then make our decisions about, am I more like the people who didn't like it, or am I more like the people who did like it? What other sources of data exist? Try not to rely on just one source of data when you're making an important decision. So we need to train our brains to say, attention, attention, bad social proof, every time one of these ploys is used against us. Influence weapon number 4 is liking. And what that means is we most prefer to say yes to someone we know and like. But this principle is used on us by strangers. So strangers can get us to believe that they are people that we like. The greatest car salesman in the world, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, who won the title 12 years straight in a row for the most cars sold, was a guy in the US called Joe, of course, Honest Joe. No, he's not called Honest Joe, I made that bit up, but his name was Joe. His success formula was, number 1, a fair price. Number 2, I'm going to be someone people like to buy from. So this is a stranger becoming someone you like through the use of ploys and tactics. Social scientists know what causes liking. They know what causes us to like people. There are a number of factors. I'll go through them briefly. Physical attractiveness is one. We have an automatic reaction to like people who are physically attractive. And we bestow upon them all kinds of unmerited virtues and qualities because they're physically attractive. We believe them to be talented. We believe them to be kind, honest and intelligent because they're physically attractive, which actually isn't very logical, but it's what our brains automatically do without us realising it. Think of the implications in politics, for example. If you want to get at the top in politics, you need to be physically attractive, don't you? So that people automatically believe all those things about you. Is that good that we only have physically attractive people? Is it good if we only have physically attractive people who don't have anything other than physical attractiveness to offer? It's not great, is it? So again, we need to become conscious of these things. So physical attractiveness causes us to like people. Similarity causes us to like people. We like people who are similar to us. So imagine the use of that in social media, for example, where people try to convince you they're very similar to you. The third thing that causes liking is compliments. So flattery, affinity, makes us compliant. Joe, that car salesman who I spoke about, used to send a card to all of his customers and potential customers every month which said, I like you. I don't know whether this would work particularly well outside of the USA or outside of the realm of car salesmanship. But it was working for Joe. He's in the Guinness World Book of Records for selling the most cars. So simply sending a card every month saying, I like you, caused people to like him, and that caused them to be influenced into buying cars from him. We're not thinking these three things through. We're not dealing with them rationally. It's an unconscious effect it's having on us. That's the point. So the next thing that causes us to like people is contact and cooperation. We like familiar things. We choose politicians that seem familiar. People have even got more votes by changing their name to a name that is more familiar in that region. That causes people to like you more. Ah, that's a familiar name. Mr. Brown. Yes, we'll vote for him. It's unconscious. We don't know we're doing it. Cooperation. If we feel like we're working for the same goals, we're all pulling together. We're all in this together. We're teammates here. We're getting a lot of this, aren't we, at the moment, trying to get us to comply with things that people want us to do in the arena of the pandemic. So, are you on the one team or not? It's a very powerful influencer. and we like people who feel like they're working with us and they're on the same team. Reasonably logical, isn't it? But it has a powerful effect. And the final one, conditioning and association. So linking products to celebrities. This is the kind of shampoo that a famous footballer would use, is something that causes us to like it. Obviously, that's why they do it. Presidents like to be associated with particular musicians or sports people, so that we like them by association. Question we can ask ourselves, am I liking someone more than is appropriate at this time? If you're trying to make a decision about who to vote for, is how much I like them, is that really the criteria? Is it really? Should we care about policies? Should we care about the effect they will have on our country? As well as, do we like them? I think so. And I think separation of business and friendship is often quite useful. If you're acting in a professional realm, if you're in a profit-making situation, I think you should separate that from friendship. See those two things as different. So if someone's really making me like them in a situation where we're trading or doing business, I need to start to ask why they're so keen for me to like them, and to what extent am I succumbing to that influence. Weapon of influence number 5 is authority. Very, very powerful authority. We tend to be obedient to people we see as being in authority, and that includes experts. So people who are in positions of authority, or people who are the expert in a subject, we tend to be obedient when they make requests of us. One of the most famous experiments around this is a thing called Milgram, that you may have heard of, which was conducted by Professor Milgram at Yale University. And what they did was they ran an experiment where they got volunteers to come in and operate a dial in a laboratory, and they told the person operating the dial that they were turning up, that they had this dial wired to a volunteer in the next room who they couldn't see, but they could hear through a loudspeaker. They said, we're applying very mild electric shocks to this person to see what impact it has on them. And as we instruct you, this expert here in the lab coat is going to instruct you to turn up the dial to a certain level, and it won't be harmful to the person next door. But we'll tell you what we want you to do. And what they did was they gradually got the volunteer, to turn up the dial on the electric shock. There wasn't really an electric shock, it was role-played, but the volunteer didn't know that. They got them to turn up the electric shock to the point where the volunteer in the next room, started screaming in pain at the level of electric shock they were receiving. And stunningly, they got the vast majority of volunteers to turn up the electric shock to the level which obviously would have been fatal had it been real. And the reason people would do it is because the expert was saying, no, it's fine, go ahead and do it. Even though all their senses were telling them, I'm doing a terrible thing here, I'm causing unimaginable pain to another human being. They were obedient to the experts. It's a very famous case. Milgram reported on this, saying, it is the extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority that constitutes the chief finding of the study. The willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths when commanded by authority. Why is that a problem? People in authority typically are there to protect us, to help us, aren't they? To do good for us. Doctors are there to cure us. Politicians are there to make life better for us. But can we trust them? Any of these people in positions of authority, can we trust them? Are they putting our interests first, or theirs? Or their sponsors? Are they putting their sponsors' interests first? Remember the one about returning favours? People have contributed to party funds and so on. Are they maybe putting their interests first, ahead of mine? Sometimes. Is it possible? Or are they putting their bigger political agenda first? Or are they putting their own personal career first? Are they telling me the truth, or are they telling me a version that is likely to get me to do what they say? So, again, I don't want to spread cynicism. I don't want to spread negativity. I want to spread a sensible approach to understanding the pressures and the motivations of people. Cialdini's words in relation to the Milgram experiment, and remember this was written in 1984, long before the pandemic. So this is not, Cialdini knew nothing about the pandemic when he wrote this, but doesn't this really resonate now? He said, I'm going to read the quote from the book, he said, "There are sobering implications of this finding for those concerned about the ability of government to extract frightening levels of obedience from ordinary citizens." That was in 1984. So we need to be aware that we are completely capable of being led in a direction by people in apparent authority, whether that be experts or people in positions. So I'm not preaching revolution, I'm not preaching conspiracy theories, I'm just pointing out that our inbuilt automatic behaviour is obedience to authority. So be aware, become conscious, make sensible choices, question things, be reasonable in your questioning of things you're asked to do. We're not in the military. You know, in the military, you do as you're told and you do it quickly, because otherwise people will die. They'll get shot. We're not in the military, we're citizens, and we get to make our own rational choices about things. We're being trained from birth, aren't we, that obedience is good, disobedience is bad. It's a kind of conditioning. But blind obedience, mechanical obedience, is not going to lead to you having a life of individual meaning, and it's not going to lead to you being a thriver. Authority can be in terms of appearance. So titles that people use, the title doctor, I've been caught with this so many times myself, the title doctor carries weight. If I pick up a book and it's by Dr. so-and-so, that carries more weight to me. I have to remember to check doctor in what, you know, because I may be assuming that's a medical doctor when it's actually a doctor of philosophy or whatever it might be. The clothes that people wear, particularly where it's a uniform, carries a lot of weight, doesn't it? Somebody in a police uniform carries a certain amount of authority, doesn't it? Somebody wearing an airline pilot's uniform carries a certain authority. The trappings of office, the car that somebody drives, the office they sit in, the mahogany desk, whatever it might be, these are all ways of giving the appearance of authority, which may cause us to unconsciously agree and do as we're told, be obedient. Here's a really scary experiment that Cialdini carried out, or somebody carried out, that's reported in Cialdini's book. In the US, they did an experiment where they asked nurses to administer dangerous doses of medicine to patients in a hospital. But the way they did it was they telephoned the nurses, and a stranger spoke to the nurse and claimed to be a doctor and told the nurse to go and administer to a certain patient what was clearly a dangerous level of a drug that they should not have been administering. 95% of nurses walked off with the dosage to give it to the patient. They were stopped before they gave any doses. These are trained, skilled nurses. That's a frightening level of compliance, isn't it? To somebody on the phone they didn't know who claimed to be a doctor. That's a terrifying example of where authority is given too much credence, too much obedience. They should have questioned. They should have at least questioned, who is this person who's phoning me? Scary, 95% of them. What are the defences against undue influence of authority? A healthy scepticism, I think. Just ask, how do I know that guy's a doctor? How do I know that person is a policeman? It's not unreasonable to ask to see ID, is it? In certain situations, or credentials. Using critical thinking, thinking for yourself. And don't give your power away. For example, doctors are there to advise. You are there to decide what's right for you. Doctors will give you advice. So get good medical advice or legal advice if it's a legal situation. But it's your decision, not the decision of the lawyer or the doctor. In fact, I looked it up. The General Medical Council guidance in the UK is that doctors recommend treatment options, but you choose, including choosing not to have treatment. So there's going to be a lot of debate about vaccines over the coming months in relation to the pandemics. And I make no judgment about whether you consider it to be a good thing or a bad thing. I think most people think it's a very good thing, and most people will absolutely have the vaccine. There are other people who take a different point of view. The point I would make is it's your choice. And I don't think anybody should be compelling anybody to take medication. I think we should be persuading people through the force of argument that it might be the right thing to do, but I don't think there should be compulsion or coercion. So, and the General Medical Council of the UK, it would seem, would back me up by saying it's your choice. Doctors advise and recommend. It's your choice whether you choose to have treatment or not have treatment. So be aware when coercion or pressure is being used, because these people are experts. Don't give your power away. Think for yourself. Weigh all the factors. For example, in the current pandemic, there are mental health and economic well-being factors as well as physical health. There seems to be so much focus, particularly in the UK. I just know that situation best because that's where I'm located. There's a lot of focus on physical health risk, but there are other risks, and we need to make rounded risk assessments as individuals and ask what's best for us and our families and the public at large in the round, not focusing on one narrow criterion. Otherwise, we're not necessarily making great risk assessments. Is this authority truly an expert? How do I know? When I read a book, before I take too much credence of it, I investigate the blurb on the back or the author profile to ask myself, who is this person and how would they know the answers to these questions? How do I know it's truthful and factual? And I may look at other sources. Usually I would Google that person to see what other people are saying about that person. So you want more evidence to know whether or not this is truly an expert. And ask, what's the motivation here? Is there a financial motivation of any kind in this? Because financial motivations can be very powerful. The final weapon of influence, number 6, is scarcity. Opportunities seem more valuable to us when their availability is limited. We desire what is in short supply, whether that be petrol, gas for the car. You know, whenever there's any suggestion that there might be a shortage of petrol or gas, if you're in the US, for your car, what's the first thing that happens? Everybody rushes out to buy some, creating a shortage. Bank runs. A run on a bank is when everybody tries to take out their money at the same time, because banks don't hold enough cash for everybody. Why would they? Nobody ever takes it all out at the same time. So a bank run crashes a bank. It brings about the effect that it was trying to avoid by taking out the cash. And why do people rush out and buy toilet paper every time there's a pandemic lockdown? I don't understand that behaviour at all. They are worried that toilet paper will become scarce, so it then becomes a highly desirable commodity. So scarcity is used a lot in sales and marketing. People are more motivated by the threat of loss than the opportunity of gain. If you're booking a room online in a hotel, it will say things like 3 other people are looking and there's only 2 rooms left. Scarcity, scarcity. You're going to lose this if you don't act. And this is acting on us unconsciously. We don't necessarily know it's happening. Anything that's rare is extremely valuable. There was a painting by David Hockney, a British artist, which sold a year ago, February 2020, for $30 million. It's a painting called The Splash. I love David Hockney. I think his paintings are fantastic. Is it worth $30 million? I don't know. I don't know. But there's only one of them, so it's very, very scarce. How amazing that Lego toys sell out before Christmas so that they're very scarce and you can't get the toy that your child wants. Isn't that amazing? I wonder why that is. Why don't they make more of it? Could there be a strategy at work? Why is it iPhones sell out, thus making them highly desirable, must-have, and getting everyone to camp? Well, not everyone, some people, to camp overnight outside the building. Why not just wait until next week? I don't understand. These are ploys to ramp up sales, aren't they? Why are there only ever a few days left before the end of the sale? Quick, get the bargain before the sale ends and the price goes up. Scarcity of time. And on Amazon, there are only ever 3 or 6 left in stock. I better buy it quickly. It's an influencer. It truly is. We react automatically and unconsciously to these things. And sometimes it's a physical response. We can feel that if we're in an auction on eBay or something like that, we can feel that feeling in the pit of our stomachs. So when we feel that, we need to be aware of that and think to ourselves, wait a minute, I'm having a physical response to this. I'm getting a bit caught up in this. So don't panic, keep calm, stay rational, and ask, why do I want this thing? Why is it so important to me? And how much should I be willing to pay, and how much is too much to pay? So those are the 6 weapons of influence that are used by these professional influencers. Conclusion, we live in information overload. That's why our brains go on autopilot. They act immediately, unconsciously. They just decide things because there's too much information coming at us to deal with. Knowledge apparently is doubling every 8 years at the moment. That's not my knowledge, that's the knowledge available. We cannot cope with the information, so our brains are more and more going to make fast, unconscious decisions. We can access all information in the world from our home, just about, using search engines and so on. So we're in an information overload. We can't process all of that fast enough. So our brains are taking shortcuts, they're making decisions. But that can lead to errors, it can lead to bad decisions, it can lead to us giving our power away. It can lead to loss of individual meaning as we follow the herd more and more and do what everybody else is doing because that seems to be safe and okay and cool and trendy or whatever it might be. There's also a real danger of allowing experts to dictate our lives and remove our freedoms. So we need to be aware of the 6 weapons, the 6 influence weapons, so that we can spot them being deployed against us and used on us, so that we can consciously make choices that fit our sense of thriving and our meaning of life. Don't be duped, make sensible choices, thrive in life, live a life of meaning, watch out for reciprocation ploys, commitment and consistency ploys, social proof, am I just following the crowd, liking, am I doing this because I like somebody, authority, is this person an expert actually? And even then, does that mean I should be obedient? And scarcity. Is scarcity being used to make me do something, to act in a certain way? These influences are all changing our behaviour. Choose to thrive, choose to live a life of meaning, and that means individual decisions about what's best for you. There we are, that's Cialdini. It's such an important subject, I believe, and he does a fantastic job in the book. So I hope you found that useful. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.